This week I saw a story that came out of Padua, Italy, the space where the taming of the shrew happened in Shakespeare's play. And it was about a woman who went into a fire department there. So I need some help of a very specific type. She had a padlock she needed unlocked. She didn't have the key. She'd lost it somewhere. And so the folks there were gathering together their things so they could go to the padlock. She said, "Oh no, it's right here." And she lifted up her dress, and it was on her chastity belt that she put on. This is not from centuries ago. This is from this week. I just want you to know. And they were a little shocked about it and wondering what was going on. And she essentially said, "I've been reading so much in the news and seen on the TV about the incidents of sexual violence that I was scared. And so I put this on." And then it said no further comments were available from either the department or from her. Fear puts chastity belts on us. Fear does things like that in our hearts, doesn't it? Fear puts us into places where we look at each other and we see something there that we choose to believe, even though it may not have any truth. And I'm not trying to say that 60-year-olds can't be sexual objects. I'm trying to say that incidents of her being sexually violated were probably relatively small, and yet she feared it. What do you fear? What is it that comes into your heart and causes you to quake? What is it that causes you to believe a story that may not be true, or at least not as true as what you think in that moment? We've been talking about control dramas and how they teach us a certain way of looking at life. And all of those control dramas ultimately are based on some type of fear that we've learned somewhere in that past. Something that mom was, something that dad was, something that those people around us said to us or did to us caused us to now react in this situation as if that is still true. And I hope you spent some time looking at your own life and trying to decide what it was that you're believing that may not be true. How it is that fear is working things in your heart that may not tell the whole truth. For we all slip into those control dramas easily, often without thinking. The hero in our story, the Celestine Prophecy, is driving through the Andes and drives down close to one of the places that is the space of my heart, Quagmire. Right in the middle of the rainforest there. And while there, he gets stopped by the police. Ends up in jail. And he struggles with what now? What do I do in this place? It absolutely brings up fear easily. In a couple days, we celebrate a holiday. Everyone know what it is? No, it's even more important. Groundhog Day. Groundhog Day. Sorry about that. Was that not working the whole time? I heard me. Groundhog Day is a day where this big rodent pokes his head out of a hole and looks around. And what's the story? If he sees his shadow, he does what? Runs away, and we have what? 6 more weeks of winter. Now, have you thought about that story ever? If he sees his shadow, what's out? The truth of the story says that he should not be fearful, that winter is being pushed away, that there is sun and and he should be joyful, and he should stay out. But he believes a different story, or we believe a different story about him. And something causes him to fear, and he runs and hides, and suddenly there we are caught in the throes of winter for 6 more weeks. But we tell that same type of story in that same type of way too often. And we get stuck in these stories that aren't the truth. In jail, our hero sits there worried about what will happen. How is it that he's going to get out of this dilemma? Fearful of all that could happen to him. And he has a dream. He has a dream where he's walking through a forest looking for a key, a secret key that will help him to unlock all kinds of knowledge, all kinds of things that will help him. And he's looking all over to find it, and it begins to rain. And the rain increases and gets stronger and stronger until it's just flowing all around him and rising below him. And suddenly it begins to the deluge that carries him down a ravine and into a river. And he begins to fight against it, trying to figure out how to get through this river. And he's trying to get away from it and trying to save himself. And he finally gets to the shore, and the shore is right next to a cliff. And he says, I got to get away from the water. And he climbs the cliff. He gets to the place of safety, he thinks. And he turns and looks back at the river, and he sees that it flows just a little ways. And out into a sunlit meadow. It becomes calm and peaceful there. And there on the banks of the river in that meadow is the key he was looking for. And he wakes up, and his cellmate is a young man, 18-year-old man named Pablo. He tells his story to Pablo, and he says, Pablo asks him a question. What if you had let the flow carry you along? What if you hadn't fought the flow of that river? What if you had engaged that flow? What would have happened? You see, so often in life, we teach each other to fight against and not trust in what could be. Not trust in how that flow is happening. It's so easy to fight, but the fight often comes from fear. And our job sometimes is to relax in the great flow around us. First John, in 3 words, tells us something very important. But it's the same thing that the Celestine prophecy tries to tell us in a lot more words. And I'm going to read both because both of them are a definition of love. And we often get this definition that has something to do with I love you or you love me, and it's me in relation to you or something else. But listen to this. Love is not an intellectual concept or a moral imperative or anything else. It is a background emotion that exists when one is connected to the energy available in the universe, which of course is the energy of God. 1 John says it simply like this: God is love. And Ed was telling us about that great passage, that 1 Corinthians passage that talks all about love, but you have to put it in the context. It's people who were fighting about who was better, who had the greatest gifts, why my gift is better than your gift. And have you heard that argument sometimes around? Why something is more important than something else? and that fighting against the flow. And then he looks at them and he speaks these words, Paul does. He says, "But I will show you a more excellent way." He talks about all those gifts and the particularities of it, and how you have this gift and you have that gift. And he says that's good and important, and in that way we can each help each other. But then he says there is a gift to which we can all aspire. A gift that every single one of us can have and possess and use and take into our world. The gift of love. The flow of love that is God in this world. And the problem is that we sometimes forget that love is a definition beyond myself and whatever it is I want to love. Love is greater than all of us. And if we are thinking it's just me and that other person, we get into those control dramas. We get into those power struggles. We steal energy from each other instead of letting that flow in us, through us, towards others. The prophecy says, stay full. Stay in a state of love. Nothing or anyone can pull more energy from you than you can replace. In fact, the energy flowing out of you creates a current that pulls energy into you at the same rate. You can never run out. But you must stay conscious of this process in order for it to work. Because things distract us. Things like being in jail. Our hero says, it's hard for me to find love in a situation like this. And how many of you have situations or people or events that sometimes makes it hard for you to love? Anybody else have that problem? Every once in a while. It happens. Here we are trying to be who we're trying to be, and suddenly we get that thing, that person who gets in the way. And that thing makes us so we want to focus on fear or disagreement or whatever it is that diverts ourselves from what's most important. And that is the flow of love. Do you know why we come together on a regular basis? I won't tell you anything that new to you. Right? Do I? Have you heard anything in church lately that is really different to you? I'm telling you, we haven't told anything new for a couple thousand years in some ways. We keep reminding ourselves. We keep shining the light of the truth back on each other. We keep telling each other the stories that we know are true, but which when we get out there, sometimes we get distracted and we forget. Right? And all that stuff out there, all those people, all those things that sometimes disagree with us, make it so that we forget the truth that we remind of each other here. And so we come together to be able to help us to be better out there. And sometimes that reminds us to be better in here. Because we aren't perfect here, you might have noticed. We sometimes disagree, right? We sometimes step on each other's toes here. But we come together to re-energize that flow, to remind ourselves that it comes from larger than any one of us. We remind ourselves to tap into something bigger in our everyday life. Because if I focus on you and whatever you're doing to me in this moment, we begin fighting over energy. But if instead I choose to focus on you and let love flow through me and into you, if I choose to let that flow happen, suddenly instead of having the argument that it could be, the obstacle that we can be for each other, we begin to allow something different to happen, a different dynamic to take over. We begin to let love define it rather than the conflict that is often there. Fear forces us further and further away from the key. We fight against the flow, but the flow of love carries us directly to where that key is waiting for us. And our job is to help each other, to feel that love so much and so readily that we don't have to fight about it. To keep helping each other to see better and more of what is true. But not everyone you meet will recognize that love. Not everyone you meet in that moment will be ready to see it like you do. But your job is to send that love into them in such a way that they begin to see it. Your job as one who has been formed by faith and who has felt faith, has felt love, is to let that love speak in you in that moment, instead of whatever else could come up. You've got good reasons why you don't like what they're doing, why you don't agree with who they are. But if you let love flow into you and through you in that moment, suddenly it has an opportunity to lift both of you and carry you somewhere beyond. Yesterday, we had a great conversation. This room was circled by a circle of chairs. Almost 70 people were sitting in this room. And we had our brutal conversation, which George is not here, but he led it wonderfully and well. And as I was preparing for this, I sat in that space and watched people converse. And you know what we do oftentimes in the conversations is you can watch and see the power struggles that go on. And there were times when, in the midst of that conversation, there was somebody who was diverting the flow to one side or another and trying to make this point or trying to get us all to do this thing or whatever, right? But what I watched as a whole in that conversation is I watched people trying to hear the flow, even in spite of their own stuff. In spite of whatever it is that they were trying to say themselves, they were also trying to hear each other. They were trying to listen and let love flow from them to that other person. In the story, our hero is sitting with two other people who are kind of his mentors, and they're having a conversation. And all of a sudden they stop and the other two look at our hero expectantly. He kind of looks, well, what's going on? And they say, we've been trying to follow where the flow of love, where the flow of energy is going in this conversation. And it feels like you have the next important thing to say. You see, that's what we should be doing every moment. Who is it that right now needs to be heard? Who is it that has something important to give to me? How is it that right now I can learn from this person in front of me? And how can I flow my love in such a way that they feel empowered? Because people don't always feel empowered to speak their truth. People don't always know if they can or should. And yet when we sit in love with them and we let that love flow into them, we allow them to speak again. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. And I use these things all the time when I do weddings. And I've been so happy to do more than 700 weddings. It's just been a joy for me to sit in that space of these couples speaking words to each other. And very often I look at them after having read the scripture and I say, your partner's not always going to be patient. They're not always going to be kind. It's not always going to be perfect in your love for each other. And so you've got to let a love greater than both of you flow through you. You have to let that greater love be the thing that speaks in that moment. In that brutal conversation, George asked us, what is the identity of this church? How would you speak words? And people had marvelous words that they used. The identity of this church for me is one thing. This church is home. A space where love dwells. May it ever be so.